Oops.
No, it doesn't appear to be.
Good idea.
Take a seat here. Get comfortable.
Yeah, grab a seat. Yes. Well, I made the teachers are going to swap around. Pick the back and just run. That's really annoying them. Right, swap around. We all know where the naughty ones are going to sit, don't we?
Good morning, everybody. My name's Michael, I'm Vicar of Chalgrove. It's lovely to see you all here. None of the couples who are getting married in my church have come, are able to come today. So I'm here to welcome you and also to start the day with a short prayer. let us pray. And we'll use a couple of short prayers from the marriage service. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you. In a sentence from the Bible. God is love, and those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. Eternal God, you ordained the union of man and woman to be the foundation of family life, to be a means of grace, and to be the wellspring of society. We pray for all who are gathered here today who are preparing to be married. And we ask that in the busyness of their preparations, your presence would accompany them, your wisdom would guide them, and your love would uphold them. Through the merits of Jesus Christ. Amen. And a collect for a wedding, which is a special prayer for a wedding. God our Father, from the beginning you have blessed creation with abundant life. Pour out your blessings upon all who are about to be married, that they may be joined in mutual love and companionship, in holiness and commitment to one another. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. And we close our short prayers with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Yeah, it's all working. Great. It's working. We've got at least one bit of tech that's working, which is a good start. Could I ask you to connect?
Yeah.
Where's my
You alright?
Can you see it?
Yeah, we're getting there. Just open up your thing.
Hopefully Windows will not update. Whilst that works its
There you
magic,
go.
I'm going to give you. Oh, it's there. It's there. For those of you getting married in Yuan, that is the picture of a couple, a real life couple getting married in Yuan. It's not me married. But it's a lovely church of this to get married. Right. It was so important then just to begin in prayer, because actually everything that we do in the context of Christian marriage sits within prayer. And so that's why we are starting today with a sort of overview of what marriage means in the Christian context. And the content of Christian marriage is all there in the service that you are going to have on your wedding day. I printed it out for you. I apologize that it's really small. Hopefully you can see what you need to. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Father Patrick. I'm the rector over in Benson and Yuan. And I just want to say a huge thank you to the Watlington team, to Father Daniel and Father David for allowing us to use this wonderful space so that we can gather together and think today about what married life means. I have been married now for 12 and a half years. So I feel like I'm getting a bit used to it. Daniel, how long have you been married?
Well, my daughter is 14 years.
14 years. So we're sort of, we offer this to you as clergy, but we offer it to you as sort of experience that we've learned as we've gone through our married lives together. Please know that as we offer it to you, we're offering it to you as those who have been married for 12 and a half years, 14 years. There was once a time when the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Rumsey, was taking part in a marriage day for those who were already married. And by this time, he'd been married quite a long time. And so the person presenting, the person sort of standing in my place here, said, Archbishop, would you come up and just say something about what, in your view, makes a marriage successful? So up he got, he was in his 70s by this stage. And he said, well, I only have one thing to say to you, which is always remember the first 50 years are the hardest. So we offer this to you on 12 and a half years and 14. But there are others who have other perspectives. We start today with the marriage service, and we start, if you have a look on the inside of your little pamphlet there that I've just handed out, I don't know whether you have had conversations with the priests who are marrying yet about the order of service or not, but when you do have those conversations, if you haven't already, you will notice that we begin the service with a welcome in God's grace. We begin the service with this wonderful sentence from Scripture, which is there at the top of the page. God is love, and those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. The whole Christian theology of marriage is grounded in the fact that God is love, that he is the source of everything that has brought you together. That he is the author of the love that you have for one another. And that in him and in his love for you is, if you like, the flow into which you step as you get married, as your love for one another is uniting you. It is his love for you, which we call in Christian terms grace. His love for you, which is undeserved and unconditional. And that's the kind of model that the love that unites a husband and wife works from. We call it grace in Christian terms, and we believe that it is the gift of God's kindness and provision towards us. And so, oftentimes in a wedding service, right at the very start, we'll acknowledge that by welcoming the whole congregation with some words along the lines of grace, mercy, and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ be with you. They're words of St. Paul, actually. But we start the service by acknowledging that we are held in that great flow of God's unconditional love for us, and that is the very first thing on which a marriage depends. We then move to a prayer which talks a bit more about that grace. If you have a look on that first page, the prayer goes like this, and why don't we say it together, actually? God of wonder and of joy, grace comes from you, and you alone are the source of life and love. Without you, we cannot please you. Without your love, our deeds are worth nothing. Send your Holy Spirit and pour into our hearts that most excellent gift of love, that we may worship you now with thankful hearts and serve you always with willing minds. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Screen for you. In that prayer is kind of summarized in short form what we think is going on in a Christian marriage. We believe that God is the source of love. We believe that he is the author of love. He is the one from whom your love for each other begins, and in whom your love finds its fulfillment. We believe also that his love works through us as human beings. It's not an abstract love that stands apart from us. It's a love that works through us as human beings. And therefore, there's a connection between his love for us and the love that you express one to another as well. If you have a little look further on, you'll see that after that prayer, we move into what's called the preface. This is a long bit which is said by the priest who's marrying you, said to the whole congregation, often it's after the first hymn. And in that we say what we think Christian marriage is about. If you have a look, it's in italics there on the bottom left-hand side. It's a long stand. But in the second paragraph there, you'll see that it says the Bible teaches us that marriage is a gift of God in creation. We believe that marriage isn't something we just come up with ourselves. Marriage is given to us by God. So not only is your love for one another dependent upon the love of God, but actually the institution of marriage itself is a gift of God to you and to the whole of society. And that basic premise informs an awful lot of Christian thinking about marriage. That your marriage is a gift to you, but also a gift to others. And if you read further down the preface on that page, you'll see that the next paragraph says that marriage is given, that husband and wife may comfort and help each other, living faithfully together in need and in plenty, in sorrow and in joy. It is given that with delight and tenderness they may know each other in love, and through the joy of their bodily union may strengthen the union of their hearts and lives. It is given as the foundation of family life, in which children may be born and nurtured according to God's will, to his praise and glory. Over and over again, you see that repeating refrain, marriage is given. We believe deeply that this is a gift, that this is a form of life, a form of relationship which is given to us by God. It's something, therefore, that has eternal meaning and eternal significance. Here I said, marriage is given as a means by which God's love flows through human beings and into the world. And you can see that in the preface, marriage is given, and it's given for three purposes. Marriage is given that husband and wife may help each other. Well, that might seem like a really obvious one to start with, and presumably your life is going to be better. We're guessing that is what we're hoping. But it's important to ground married life in that fact. Marriage is given so that you can become one another's legal and utterly reliable bedrock. And it is given to you for that purpose. Marriage is given that husband and wife may help each other. Marriage is given as the appropriate framework for bodily and sexual expression of our humanity. It's one of those things that's sort of fallen to the back of our memory in contemporary society. But marriage is given precisely as the framework in which a physical relationship makes enduring sense. Also a framework in which the complexities of physical relationships can find a way of being positive rather than destructive. And if you've ever had really bad sex, you will know that being in a relationship where you can totally rely on the enduring presence of the other person is a necessary thing. Marriage is given as the foundation of family life. God has given us this form of relationship. God has given us this gift of marriage. And in it, he creates a framework in which everyone knows where they are, in which everybody can be secure in the place that they have. Children who grow up in a married home, in a happily married home, we know, are statistically more likely to have better outcomes later in life. We also know that families that are stable are the kind of families in which goodness flourishes. And marriage is given to us really as a, not just as a contract, but as a covenant into which we step. It's given to us as a covenant which is unbreakable. And it's given to us as a covenant that is utterly reliable. And that gives us the kind of stability we need to found and build family life. Marriage is given. We've said this over and over again. It's given by God. We believe that marriage is a gift of God in His grace, and that is why we care so much about it. That is why we've dragged you on this lovely day here to help you think about it. Because we believe that marriage is a gift from God which transforms the face of the world. We believe that marriage is a gift from God through which His love flows to all of creation. And because we believe that, it really matters that we get it right. So it's not just for you and for your relationships, but it matters that we get marriage right. It's not just for your well-being and your joy as a couple, but it matters that we get marriage right. Our whole society depends on this. Our families depend on this. That's why we care about it. But of course, because marriage is given, because it's given by God in this particular form, this particular shape, with these particular sets of expectations, all of which you'll hear preached about on your wedding day in the preface and preached about in the sermon. Because marriage is given by God, it means there are ways of doing marriage that are right and ways of doing it that are wrong. That sounds transparently obvious until you're in it. And when you're in it and you have to improvise every moment of every day, it becomes much harder to work those things out as you go. That's one reason why we're here today, so that we can try and think through some of the ways in which we might do it right. So we're going to go back to the order of service now, and you'll see if you take up your orders of service on the inside page on the right-hand side there, you'll see after the end of the collect, we move to the declarations. Now these are the first legal bit. If you've been to a registry office wedding, oftentimes you don't get to see the declarations. They're taken in private by the couple in front of the registrar. And they amount to, do you give your consent? Do you actually want to get married? And are you promising to take your married life seriously? These three components of the declaration: your consent, your intention to marry, and your intention to remain faithful. And those are expressed in a particular form of these declarations. Before we get to the declarations, I will just tell you this. The vows that you take are made in the presence of God. God knows the secrets of all our hearts. And so if there are legal impediments to your marriage, we have to make sure we know them up front. So you will be asked if either of you knows a reason why you may not lawfully marry, you must declare it. The congregation is also asked that question. And I'm trying to think which films have this moment in.
EastEnders must.
EastEnders definitely.
At least every year.
Yeah, and somebody stands up and says, I have an objection. There are very few legal grounds on which an objection can be made. You could be not who you say you are. Somebody could say, these are imposters, they're not the people that you think they are. That's why we check your passports. You could already be married.
Just checking.
No, we laugh, but it does sometimes happen that couples have already got married, but they haven't mentioned that to us. We can't marry you again, so don't rush to the registry office between now and your wedding day, because we can only marry you once. So if you're already married, you can't get married again. I'm presuming you would have mentioned to us if you were married to someone else already. What are the other reasons? Your legal preliminaries may not have been undertaken properly. So many of you will have banns being called in church. Those are what's called legal preliminaries to make sure that that the wider public has a chance to raise objections for lawful reasons why you may not know. But we're in charge of your ban, so it's on our head if we get those wrong and your legal preliminaries are not done adequately. You may be related to one another by some degree of kindred affinity, which is prohibited under law. Very unlikely today, but if you can imagine, if you lived, say, in Yuan 150 years ago, it is just possible that somebody might know of a degree of relationship between you of which you are not aware. So there's the possibility of raising that as well. Finally, you may not be of sound mind. And I always say to my couples, I've met you, we've had a conversation, you've filled in lots of paperwork for me. If that doesn't establish that you're of a sound mind, I don't know what will. However, I do not know your alcohol tolerance threshold. And I can't marry you if there's any doubt in my mind as to whether you're a sound mind. So please don't have a drink on your wedding morning, until afterwards. That's the main one for you to be aware of. Main cause that might delay your wedding. Anybody from the congregation can raise any of these objections. If they do, and they're vexatious objections, we have to investigate them as soon as they're raised. But if they do raise them and they turn out to be vexatious, then the case law, just for your peace of mind, the case law does demonstrate that those who have raised the vexatious objection are then liable to pay your costs. So you have a degree of protection there. But I'll ask you as well, because it's possible that you may know a reason in law why you may not marry, and nobody else in the congregation does. You are required to declare it before God. You are required to declare it for legal reasons. If you can think of it, please tell us sooner rather than later, because often we can work it out. But that bit being done, we then move to the declarations themselves to establish your consent to marry one another. So that's partly about your sound mind, yeah? That you're not being coerced into this. To establish your intention to marry one another. Your intentions have to be towards marriage. You can't accidentally get married. Right? And to establish your intention towards faithfulness, because if you aren't intending to marry for the rest of your life, that calls into question everything that you subsequently say. So, the questions that we asked the bridegroom first, because historically it was always thought that he had more to lose, so we had to get him to answer first. So I said, bridegroom, will you take bride to be your wife? Will you love her, honour and protect her, and forsake him or others who faithful to her as long as you both live? And I've underlined and put into red there the verbs. And I always think these are really interesting verbs. Will you take one another? It's an odd kind of verb, isn't it? Will you take one another? Not will you receive one another. Not will you accept one another. Will you take one another? This is a really active verb, isn't it? It's a verb that involves you doing something. Will you take one another to be your spouse? It's deliberate. And then we move on to the more familiar ones. Will you love one another? We use that word so easily, don't we? I wonder, I'll give you a moment to think about this. What is contained in that word? Will you love one another? Will you love one another? What does that word mean for you as a couple? What's contained in that word, love? Here's another one. Honour one another. Honour is a difficult one. What does it mean to honour your spouse? We often say in church circles that the opposite of shame is honour. And an awful lot of us carry with us all kinds of shame from our background, from our previous relationships. Many of us carry shame from complex relationships, even abusive relationships in the past. Honour is what remedies shame. Will you honour one another? Will you protect one another? What does it mean to protect one another? Sometimes it's really obvious, right? If there's, if you're stepping out into a road and there's a bus hurtling towards you, you know what protect means there. What does it mean to be protecting one another against other people's advances, against other people placing expectations upon you? What does it mean to protect one another against your in-laws and their expectations? Against your employer's expectations? What does it mean to protect one another against yourselves? My wife likes to remind me that she said these words. She listened to these words and answered, "I will," on our wedding day. And sometimes she needs to protect me from myself. Sometimes being a spouse means saying, "Your judgment is flawed. I am deciding for you." How do you negotiate that together? And forsaking one another, be faithful to one another as long as you both shall live. Now that sounds really obvious, doesn't it? Of course you're going to be faithful to one another. Why else would you bother getting married? But what does faithfulness mean? My wife likes to remind me. She would be delighted actually to be doing this day with me in my place here, because she could tell you some interesting stories. But she loves to remind me of how when we first got married, our ideas of what that category of being faithful meant were not exactly aligned. And that I thought it was fun to say to my parents that my wife didn't like the colour of their bathroom. It was just how I talked to my parents. We're brazen with one another. We are that kind of family. We're straightforward. My wife's family is not like that. If I told my father-in-law I don't like the colour of his bathroom, there would be tears for days. He'd want to repaint the whole thing because he'd think he'd upset me grievously by having a blue bathroom. And so when I told my parents, "Oh, Lydia thinks that bathroom colour is hideous," I thought it was fine. She thought I'd really stepped over a line. That was the kind of thing that we keep to ourselves. It's a trivial example, but can you see how the thresholds of what makes faithfulness, they're not always obvious, and they take some thinking and some teasing out together. And so, I'm going to give you just a moment. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to look at those verbs now as couples and see what jumps out at you. And just have a think about anything you want to park for later and discuss in the car on the way home. Okay, we've got 2 minutes. They're interesting words, aren't they? You unpack them. If I'm marrying you, one of the things that when you come for dinner, I will ask you to do is to take those words home and to talk again about them and to work out what you think the contours of those words mean. I will say this, I've been married 12 and a half years and we've been learning all 12 and a half years what we think those words mean. And we have changed what we think they mean. We have discussed them, and we have come to, particularly faithfulness, what we thought faithfulness meant to us. We've discovered in our own feelings and emotions that actually, in this way, the category is a bit wider, and in this way, we don't have to worry about it. Right at the end, when I've asked you those questions, or the priest marrying you has asked you those questions, the answer is, I will. Assuming you do. Assuming you do intend to marry after those list of questions. In Hollywood, in America, they are asked questions and then they say, I do. In this country, we're more realistic. We know that this is a declaration about future intention, not what you feel like right now. It's not an I do at the moment. It's a resolve, I will. And it's really important we put this into the future tense. I married a couple this last September who had been together 26 years and had 4 children and adopted a 5th. And the bride was saying afterwards how moving it was to put this question, the answer to this question, into the future tense. Even after 26 years, what matters is the future. What matters is your intentions towards the future. So I do encourage you to have a look at those declarations and vows as you go on preparing for your marriage. If you just turn over the page, after you've said I will, a question that I then ask to your full congregation. So will you, the families and friends of bride and groom, support and uphold them in their marriage now and in the years to come? And everybody choruses, we will. This is quite useful for you to point out in advance if you have parents or family who you think are likely to find it hard to let go of you, right? Because oftentimes parents do find it hard, siblings find it hard when you get married, that their relationship with you changes and has to change and should change, because as you marry, you become a family unit. You're not members of another family, you become a new family. So it can be quite helpful for you to flag up to other family members that they are going to have to say this vow as a sort of promise that they're handing you over one to another and that they're supporting you in that. After that, we have the collect, which Michael paid for us earlier, and then we move to vows. So I invite you, you'll come to you'll be at the front, you will face one another, you will join hands, and I will then, the priest will then ask you to recite your vows. And again, you're going to have a little bit of word study on this one. I suggest to you actually that you take these vows home and you say them to one another every day between now and your wedding day. Because it means, apart from the fact that you then learn them, which is always helpful for your marriage service, it will mean that they really sink into your heart and they become the form by which you relate to one another. So the more often you can say these vows to one another, the better. But they go like this. I take you, and again, we've got taking again, to be my right husband, to have and to hold from this day forward. Interesting verbs again. To have, to hold. Very physical word there, isn't it? In this day forward, for better, for worse. It's interesting, isn't it? But better goes first. Usually in our society now, we get the bad stuff out of the way quickly and then we come with the positive stuff. Not in the marriage vows. We're realistic here. You're more likely to leave these vows when things go badly than when they go well. The better for worse. What in your mind, I wonder, constitutes the better and worse that might happen in your married life together? I'll just give you an example. In the church where I used to serve, there was a couple who'd been married for a very long time, and one morning we got really unexpected news that Rose had died and she'd actually committed suicide. And it was very unexpected because none of us had known that she was ill. None of us had known even that she'd struggled with serious mental health issues all of her life. But her husband came and said to us, he said, well, we've been married 48 years, and for 48 years I've been carrying through this. And I'm just, he said, I'm just relieved that she doesn't have to do it anymore. And I thought, 48 years. 48 years. Sometimes there's more worse than there is better. And we make these vows, big vows like this, precisely because we don't know what's coming next. And we make them precisely because if we knew what was coming next, we would be scared and we wouldn't make them. We'd ditch one another before we came across all that goes wrong. We say better and worse. And even though we don't know what is contained in the better and the worse that the future's going to hold, we make those vows anyway. They're big vows, aren't they? The richer, the poorer, in sickness and health, to love and to cherish. There's love again. We talk about it a lot. What does it mean to you? What does to cherish mean to you? When do you feel cherished? When have you felt cherished? Can you find in your memory an occasion in your past where you thought, I know what it means, what it feels like to feel cherished? Can you do that for one another? Again, big words, big vows. Till death us do part, according to God's holy law, and in the presence of God I make this vow. These aren't just vows that we make to one another, sort of, because it's nice, because we feel them at the moment. We make them in the presence of God, and He is there to hold us to them. So I do commend those vows to you. Say them to one another, discover the depth of their meaning, kind of every day between now and your wedding day, and I promise you, you'll find that very reflected. I'm going to canter on because we're pushing time. Once we've done, actually before we've done the vows, we have readings in the sermon, and the readings that will be chosen, they help us to remember that marriage is about becoming more deeply human to one another. We believe that God has brought you together as a couple. We believe that it's part of God's plan for you as individuals, that your life should be shared with this person, and that this person should therefore change who you are, and you should change who they are. We believe that actually God is making you more freshly and newly yourself through this union. And the readings in the sermon are supposed in the marriage service to help you begin to think about how that might play out in your married life together. So as you're choosing your readings with your priest who's marrying you, do have that in mind. What readings from Scripture, what readings perhaps from poetry or from other forms of literature might help us just to nudge that bit closer to being more human, more the people God is calling us to be. Right, then when we go over the page after the vows, there's a middle page of the booklet here. So the giving and receiving of rings. And rings are, of course, a physical reminder that marriage is a physical covenant. You're not disembodied human beings getting married in mind and so on. You're getting all of you is married. And that means all that you have and all that you are is being joined together. And rings, a physical reminder of that. Again, you have words to say as you get to ring. I give you this ring as a sign of our marriage. With my body, I honour you. There it is again. What does it mean to honour one another with your body? Especially in view of how many people have felt shame on account of their bodies. This is something that only a spouse can do. All that I am, I give to you. I don't know whether you've thought about your married life like that before. In some senses, it's really straightforward. You get married, and all of the stuff that was previously in your kind of ownership are now pooled. But you still have to deliberately give to one another, don't you? You can't just expect it to happen naturally. You have to give to one another all that you are. And all that I have, I share. You're probably very used to sharing things, but what does sharing mean once you become, in the eyes of God, one flesh? More big goes. So here's a question for you. 2 minutes. How do you honour, give and share as a couple? How do you think that might change once you've said your marriage vows? 2 minutes. It's not intended that you should end these conversations now, by the way. You can carry them on later.
That's a huge question.
Sorry, my 2 minutes are very short. One of the things that I hope you got that. And one of the things that I hope that this very sort of brief rush through the marriage service has done for you is to help you to focus your attention on what will actually happen in the service. Because everything that we believe about marriage, what makes a marriage work, is there. It's contained in the words that you will say, the actions that you will undertake. But they take some real serious deep thought. They touch on very deep issues that you will gain a great deal from if you can spend some time between now and your wedding day and after your wedding day. It's a good thing to do on anniversaries, working through as a couple and giving time to you. But one of the things that I also hope that rush through the marriage service has done for you is to give you a sense that what you're doing in a wedding service is not just a legal contract. It's not just even a legal contract before your friends and family or a legal covenant before God. It's actually a way of worshipping God. It's a way of standing in the presence of God and declaring that you are going to seek to live your life as a couple in obedience to Him and for the best for your new spouse. It's what we do in the wedding service is begin a life, not just for you together, but a life in which you two together relate to God and live as children of God. Right? We believe as Christians that marriage is a sacrament. We talk about it in sacramental terms. And what we mean by that is the grace of God works through your married life to bless you and others. We believe that marriage is a way of living for God that blesses the whole world. So it's not just about you. It's about how you live in the flow of God's grace. And I hope just having rushed through the order of service there, you've seen that both your wedding service and your whole lives become ways of worshipping God. So I do just want to give you a chance to think about worship now, because this will become especially relevant after your wedding day. Many of you are coming to church to worship God, to establish a legal connection with the church in which you're getting married. You no longer have any obligation to do that once you're married. But you've begun a way of worshiping God. You've begun a life in a church setting where people are supporting you in both the life that you're living for one another and the life that you've started to live for God. What does the future hold in terms of worship? And also, how do you worship God? This is not something that many couples tend to discuss before they get married. What does worship mean to you? What does your relationship with God mean to you? You're getting married in the presence of God. Well, what does that mean to you? It will become really important later in life. I mean, you can talk to Daniel about what it can be like when one of you worships God in one way and it doesn't quite go the same for the other. How do you each worship God? Are there different ways in which you worship? Question for you to consider. And then all these, which seem like lovely, indulgent questions right now, they become very practical questions. Should you have children? Because your children will learn to worship in the way that you teach them. They won't sort of magically find a path of their own. Children never do that. They pick up from their parents. How do you want your children to worship? Especially at the start. What do you think about baptism, christening? What do you think about being in a church school? So 2 minutes now, we've gone over a bit, I'm sorry. 2 minutes now just to think about what worship means to you and how you worship, and what you might want it to mean for your descendants should you have them. That's a real whistle-stop tour through the marriage service. Please do take these booklets home, have a peruse of them together, talk with your priest who's marrying you about anything that's come up today that you want more information on, that you want to discuss further with them. Please do talk as a couple about these questions between now and the wedding day and afterwards. I promise you we put the heavy stuff at the front. We front load because we want just to kind of burst your minds open and your hearts open as we start this day. Every session from now is going to be less esoteric and more practical. But we wanted to get you thinking in theological terms to begin the day, because actually everything flows from the grace of God, and everything that is going to happen in the married life together flows from His grace too. So we wanted to start there with the theology of marriage. We do now have a 5-minute break. Father David has made coffee and tea. There are biscuits there. Please do grab a coffee and a cup of tea if you'd like one. come back. We'll start again in 5 minutes, and Father Dan is going to talk to us about family backgrounds. So one of the things that I have a couple of people ask me about is coming to church. It'd be good for us to do that. I'm not sure how practically it works.
Yes, all right. Should we do that now? Yeah, okay. Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah. Yeah, we should. And I think we've got yes, no. These things are yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We do all the yeah, there's loads of this. We can talk about that. I mean, you've got it's not that, and it's believing. It's also war. Yeah, it's pretty simple. But we do believe in God, it's eternal love. So when you think of yourself as that sort of system, it's not like you really have, you're not going to oh, hello, you changing stages. Yeah, good stages. Oh, I just did it. I think we did it. All right, thank you. So we kept it slightly more. We won't organise the papering. Yeah. But the catering department have arrived, so that's good news for later. Our original catering lady had COVID, unfortunately, so we put another team involved. So if I can invite you just to sit down and we'll get on with the next bit. I can't find my clicker, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to put it around. Sorry, Patrick.
Just take mine out and put it into your.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Reverend Daniel Thompson. I'm the vicar here. I've got one of my couples here that I'm marrying. I've been here about 5 years. As Patrick said, I've been married for 14 years. I was with my wife 8 years before we were married. So actually, we've been together quite a long time. That's well over 20 years. And I have a 13-year-old daughter. So I think most things that we've talked about, or most things we can understand in marriage, I've probably experienced. And I think the longer you're married, the more things you have to deal with. We might talk about that a bit later, about employment, about bereavement, about children, all these kind of lovely, rich things that make life interesting. I always worry at this stage that I realise it's a little bit male-heavy. There's no kind of plan to this, and it's not deliberate. We've got blokes standing up talking about marriage. And actually, in other years, we'd like to have some more women and balance it out. There's no kind of sinister thing going on there. It just happens to be that way. And what's really lovely is, as Patrick said, we sort of started the session with this wonderful ideal, this absolute great gift of marriage from God. The God that we believe is eternal love. And it's the best thing in the world, and certainly for my own marriage. You know, actually getting married itself had a huge impact on my own faith. when I just thought, I didn't want to just sign a bit of paper in an office somewhere. I wanted something that was cosmic, something deep and powerful and eternal. I wanted my marriage to be that kind of, I wanted the best kind of marriage you could have. And the best marriage you can have is this sense of the Christian marriage, something that actually goes on forever. It's an incredible thing and a real joy, and just so much better than anything else I believe the world offers. So we started off with this really lovely ideal, this really rich sense of what we're working towards, and that's lovely. But the great thing about Christianity is it's a very grounded religion. It's about real life and day-to-day life. It's not about living up some kind of magical aim. It's about recognizing that actually what really happens is the nuts and bolts go on every day. And that's the kind of faith in God we believe in. So from now on, as Patrick said, we're going to sort of just unpack some of the kinds of things we experience in life and just have an opportunity to talk about them. It's a really, really good thing, this. I've done this several years now with Patrick and Michael, and actually every time I sit here, it makes me think about my own marriage. It makes me think about the same questions that are ongoing. And so having an opportunity like this, we're saying we didn't have this when we weren't married, is such a gift, and you probably won't realise it necessarily at the time. But actually, you're going to have conversations today that maybe some of the only times you have those conversations, like if it's not, but for some people, you might never have these kinds of conversations. And it's really important to have this time together and open up some of the kind of the issues that we're facing. So the first thing we're going to look at, I think this will work, is, what have I done? There we go. Is we're going to look at our backgrounds. And I've got a clip to show you, which is about the best thing I've found about family background.
Relax, just have to completely stop. You should have seen the look on your face. Oh, okay, you got me. That was a good one. Yes, it was. Funny. But you should never talk. No, it's disrespect. Right. Of course. Yeah. Right. Man reaches a certain age when he realizes what's really important. You know what that is? Love, friendship, enjoying the moment, living just love. His legacy. That too, right? Yeah, sure. Now, my grandson, little Jack, is part of that legacy. Mm-hmm. 6 months from the family, we're going to be married, sometime after that, you want to start a family reunion, right? Yeah, actually, you know what, on that subject, I had some thoughts about the wedding date. Let's not after this weekend, right? Now, let's get back on point. Let me put it very simply. If your family circle doesn't indeed join my family circle, they'll form a chain. I can't have a chain in my chain. Yeah, okay. I guess we're at work. Now, I've never met your parents, so I'm not going to jump to any hasty conclusions. But like, study what goes in caveman, if I can see where you came from, I'll have a much better idea where you're going. Okay. Are you thinking maybe my parents might be like a chink in the chain, or? Talking to a lawyer. What's the lawyer about? Oh, I didn't get a message. You leave a message. What are you talking about? I didn't get over here and plant one on you. I'm listening. So warm, baby. My best buddy is the theater. I missed this one. That's the most handsome young man I've ever seen in my life. And they call him a young Jewish woman, man. What did I see from the phone? Testicle? Oh. No, really. It's true. I only have one because the other one never dropped. It's called understanding. It's an uncommon. But look at him. Imagine what he would have looked like if I had two. That's a good icebreaker. Whoa! There's a second grade teacher I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, that's a good one. I'm Brian. It's so nice to meet you.
Was he pleasure? You got to meet Bob. That's right, Jack Burns, and father, and I'm Bernard Popper, and you're our father, and we're all grown up here, and we shake hands like men. Give me some love. What are you so shy about? Come here. Oh, wow. Look at those pants. Wow, you're hard to cheat rock. Not coming to you know the drop plates, right? It's like the various calisthenics and medicine balls, man. Like climbing through football. Oh, football. I was just practicing the capoeira. What? What? Oh, capoeira. It's really martial art dance, I guess. You know what that is? Yeah. You know, I've been doing it for weeks. Really for it. Keeps me well. Because sometimes I get wound up so tight, I could just snap. You know what I mean? What is that? What is that? Is that a baby on? That's a baby, yeah. Mm-hmm. It's all a message. Hey, Moses, it's actually the future in-law. Hey,
Okay. I mean, as you realise from the clip, family background is a great source of comedy, isn't it? I mean, we don't get them so much now, but when I was growing up, you've got all the mother-in-law jokes and all that kind of thing. And it's still probably a source of comedy and also tension, let's say, in your own relationships. And it's always interesting when you meet a new person and you start dating and you're going out and all the rest of it, that actually you start to unravel a little bit about your family background, isn't it? And it's not always necessarily the things you start with, is it? You might talk about all the things you can share, but eventually you can't hide forever, and your family starts appearing, and your family background starts appearing, and your family history comes out. And it's really important, actually. And I think the longer you're together, the more these things seem to have an impact. I think maybe for a while you try and cut yourselves off or try and pretend about things. I mean, this bit is bad because he's got nowhere to hide, is he? I mean, it's just there in front of him. And I know in my own relationship, my wife's now saying more and more, warning everybody, I'm turning into my dad. I go, no, I'm not, because you really are. I mean, as it happens, I got on very well with my in-laws. My mother-in-law's died. But we did get on quite well. But they were wildly different. You know, my in-laws were kind of 60s generation, and kind of a big in the 60s thing and living in London and doing all that kind of stuff. My parents got a little bit generation, they're the post-war generation, so they're just worlds apart. I mean, they're both very nice, but they are completely different. And I do remember my wedding day, my mum being very late, and my mother-in-law had to wait for her hair appointment and all these kinds of things. And my mum being very scattered, forgot things, and she was about 3 hours late, and just the tension was there. But you probably realise, and I'm not going to ask you now, as you prepare for your wedding, these kind of tensions come up, don't they? I had this sort of mad, I don't know if it's a mad idea, this idea that I was going to give all our money to charity on our wedding day, that was going to be the gift, you know, me being trying to be very pious and all. And my mother-in-law couldn't stand this concept. And she just sat there, and in the end, it was a very difficult moment, actually. And I think, as all sensible men realise, you do what your mother-in-law says. And it certainly made things a lot easier after that. But you know, these things really do stir up some issues. So it's really good to have some time just to talk together, and I've got my sheet, to think about your own background. What is it you've inherited? What kinds of values are there? You might think you're sharing all the stuff that you think you need to share, but you won't realise, and probably it'll be your partner that will make you realise, all the stuff that you've inherited. I don't see that I'm anything like my dad, but my wife seems to think it's basically, you know, I'm a clone, which I think is not fair. So just have a minute, a couple of minutes, just to think a little bit about what kinds of baggage and expectations. I mean, Patrick shared a little bit of his. Do you come from? You know, say my parents come from 60s generation to post-war generation are very different in terms of values. I don't think my parents are particularly uptight, but they're not the 60s generation. So I have a couple of minutes just thinking a little bit about this. Please, I hope this isn't the point where we all split up and, and go home. But it's an opportunity to be aware of what's there. These are my parents actually on their wedding day. They end up in the paper, which is rather nice.
Yeah, if I pass and then money, it's through a bit. Well, let's see how we get on.
Yeah, and I've got those already. But well, there is some laughter, so that makes me happy. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to laugh at your relatives, don't you? If you can't do that, then you're really not going to get anywhere. And I think that is the only way forward. But these can cause real tensions. And I'm sure you will have already realised this. I can't imagine there's a couple on Earth who haven't encountered some kind of family dynamic tension. It's very interesting, actually, in COVID. I had a few weddings, which was really interesting. And some of the couples were like, actually, I'm so sorry, it's really awful, you can only have 10 people or whatever. Actually, we're really pleased because it solves us a lot of problems. And it was interesting that dynamic was there. Actually, some people found a relief not having to get involved in all the seating plan, which was always quite entertaining. So a really interesting one is about priorities. This is really huge. And again, Patrick suggested earlier about the values about bathroom paint. But actually, these are all kinds of things that are quite significant, and I think worth spending a bit of time on. Your own values. And we'll talk about this a bit later. I think particularly when Patrick talks about money, I think that's a really key one. Me and my wife have very different approaches to money, and so do our in-laws, and all that kind of stuff. But actually, priorities are really key. I mean, my wife's very family-based, so she's always talking. I don't know if it's a male-female thing, but she's always talking to her family. Having a dad and all this kind of thing. I don't do this very often at all, and I just bumble along. But actually, this can cause tensions, and so historically, they can be quite difficult. When someone comes from maybe a big family that are very family-orientated, you find you're always doing things with their family. Classic one's Christmas, isn't it? What do you do at Christmas? I no doubt you would have worked all these things out by now. But there are ongoing issues as well, and they will change. So just a couple of minutes. With friendships, again, that's another one, isn't it? Maybe you have the same friendship groups. It's very likely, but maybe you have different friendship groups. Maybe you have friends that your partner can't stand, and you don't really like them spending any time with. But these are all things that need to be kind of unpacked a little bit and having an opportunity to talk. So just give you a couple more minutes, just thinking about expectations about priorities in these areas. Okay. Again, these are things that you may always, and they will obviously change as you go through your life, but it's always worth coming back to these kinds of questions. Decision making, I mean, again, you know, there's always people who make decisions in different ways, aren't there? There'll be somebody who's a bit spontaneous quite often. I mean, it's two extremes. You've got the kind of spontaneous person who's a bit like me, really, just leave something and just do this. And then the other person who's a bit more conditioned. And sometimes that can cause tensions, can't it? Again, it's really helpful just to know in your own relationship which one of you, where you sit with these kinds of things, and how you come to make decisions. Because of course you will have decisions to be made throughout your life. A wedding is full of decisions, and I think a wedding and planning a wedding together is a great way actually of working through a lot of stuff. You know, who's doing this, how you prioritize. I mean, for me, it's always the music. So I didn't really make any decisions other than the playlist. And I spent months on the playlist. I should have probably got more involved in other areas, perhaps, but my mother-in-law had to do that. So I got the playlist, and I was very happy with that. But you know, these kinds of things are always ongoing. And it's worth thinking about how you make decisions. I'm going to skip on a bit. I mean, in your life, you're going to have huge decisions, aren't you? And no doubt, I don't know how long you've all, I mean, I don't know you particularly how long you've been together, but you may well have decided to move house. Probably your lives are a lot more complex now than they were. You know, once upon a time, you maybe had one working partner and a non-working partner. Now we're both often working. There are all huge priorities, and our economic situation leads itself to all kinds of changes that we may or may not encounter and may not be prepared for, but worth thinking that through. Love languages, right. Where are we? So this is really nice. So these are the negatives, but the positives are kind of the things that keep us together. And it's really worth knowing the kinds of things that you use to communicate. And again, you might not realise this. A lot of these things are quite natural. You know, the nice thing about being in love is actually a lot of things unsaid. You share a joke together, whatever it is that kind of brings you together. There are all kinds of things, and there are things that have brought you together to begin with. If you think back to when you started going out, what were those things that brought you together? They may well have changed, and they will change throughout your life. But having a way of thinking about these things, what is it at the moment? What's your primary love language? What are the things that really kind of bring you together? Is really helpful. And you may think, and I think for me, thinking about, 14 years together, going back and thinking, what were the things that got us together to begin with? And to remind yourself of these things are really helpful. Maybe if you're having a time where you're struggling a little bit and things have been a bit difficult, to remind yourself, actually, what is it that kind of keeps us together? So spending a little bit of time just thinking through the love languages. What are the things that really kind of keep you together at the moment? What are the main way of communicating? Which isn't just words, but there's we've got 5 on here. And it's worth just exploring those a little bit and thinking, actually, what is it? I mean, you know, when you start going out, little gifts, little notes, I mean, I know, and I don't do that anymore. You know, isn't that awful? And I look at this and think, oh, yeah, I know, I used to, you know, I mean, we all know it. I haven't got flowers for a while, and I'm just based on the guilt trip now, as I look down this list. But there are all kinds of things, aren't there, that you can do. It's really, really helpful to highlight what is it that you've got? I mean, it's a boring phrase, your USP, but what is it that you have as a couple? And they're going to be unique. You know, I mean, I think me and my wife, we've been together a long time, let's be honest. I met her when I was 16, when we didn't date then, but we have a long shared history. So a lot of it is just kind of like brother and sister who are basically rude to each other, in a nice way. And a lot of humour, actually, is probably our main love language, I think. But it may be cooking, or whatever it is that you do that you really like. So we'll give you, how long have we got?
Dan, before you do that, do you want me to just say something?
Yeah, you can talk about that
because I'm aware that it's these were really popular in the 90s.
I didn't know this, so Patrick always tells me this, but I missed this somewhere.
Love languages was a really popular concept in the 90s, and then it sort of dropped out of fashion, but it's really useful. Like, it doesn't cover everything, but it's a really useful starting point. So the idea is that as individuals, each of us have ways that we most naturally express our love for another person, and we also have ways which we most naturally receive love. Okay? And each of us has one of these, which is our primary love language, and and our primary way of showing love, a language that we show love in. And it's really useful if you can identify early on which is your primary way of showing love and which is your primary way of feeling loved. Because oftentimes you can find that they don't match up naturally. And if you've spoken about it and worked it out beforehand, you can then remedy that. So an example, I feel very loved, like most men. I'm a physical touch kind of person, and you can see it in little boys as well. You know, they want cuddles all the time. So if my wife wants to show me that she loves me, she holds me. That's the quickest way to get me to feel loved. In terms of showing love, I actually really quite like buying gifts. I just find that a really lovely thing to do, and so I buy gifts a lot for my wife, and really fortunately, she really feels loved receiving gifts. So that works out quite nicely. I, on the other hand, could not give anything about receiving gifts. So my wife once bought me a very lovely birthday gift. It was beautiful. It was I was an academic at the time. It was a silk hood for my degree. And she bought the most beautiful, most expensive one that she could. I was like, oh, thanks. I had to remember, this was her deliberately trying to show, thank you, I recognise this, and I had to go into words of affirmation mode, because that's another way that she feels love. So I had to say, thank you, you have made a real effort, and I really appreciate it. So if you can identify what your main way of feeling loved is, and what your main way of showing love is, and then swap notes, it can be quite useful.
I mean, I just think of Patrick, and I remember a lot of the fun, isn't it? I think of being, and certainly in the early stages of a relationship, is this whole thing, because you don't really know, do you? And we all make these. I mean, I remember buying my wife a surprise haircut. You know, oh, what the women? Oh, I know. You know, and I'm feeling so excited about this thing that I've done for her. Unfortunately, she was really hungover. And actually, it was one of the worst experiences of her life. And I was waiting for her outside the hairdresser's, and I was so excited that she just came out, and I just sat there, and it was just horrendous. And I'm sure you've all got these kind of stories, and it is great fun, actually, because we're going to get it wrong. As you get to know each other more, it gets easier, I think. But it does change, and of course, certain things that you really like at one point in your life will change for all kinds of reasons. As you mature, as just you change generally. But I think it's a really fun exercise, isn't it? I think, and yeah, certainly a lot of fun.
You can still see her face now.
Sorry, oh, yeah, sorry. I'll give you a bit longer because there's quite a lot to talk about, and then we'll have a break. So about 10 minutes. Sorry on this. That's good. I always forget that bit. No, all right. Yeah, you can do that. I mean, I just have a control. Oh, they don't, you can tell. You can manage to see it. Are we just getting on with the next session, or we have another break? No, okay.
Is this the end of the session?
Yeah, yes. If we just bring this one to a close, but it's worth looking up, and like I said, as you go throughout your life, coming back to these kinds of things, it is really, really helpful. So when you lose your way, which you may or may not do, but most likely over a long marriage, think back to this session. You know, try and park it in your mind. I mean, what was it that we talked about that time? Let's go back to some of those things. And I'm sitting here saying, what a massive guilt trip. I really need to go find my wife, but not a haircut. Let that work. Flowers. I'm going to do that today. Yeah. Right. So we're going to have a swap over now. Just to mention, I haven't told you this, so I apologise. We have these just at the back here. And if you need anything, we've got a kitchen here. Just grab one. And then Pat's going to talk about money, which is a big one.
Right, have a 5-minute break, use the loo if you need to, and then we'll press on.
We're going to get pirate shop. Yeah. Go to a junk shop and get a pirate.
Do you want to do a quiz?
Oh, I do want to do a quiz.
This is a good quiz. I like
Pens.
Does everybody have a pen or
We do have some
some
around.
kind of implement with which to write? Dan will supply if you need a pen. So we talked a little bit in that last session about the various kinds of baggage that we all bring to marriage, to married life. I mean, there will be. You probably have worked this out as you have lived your life together, related to one another and to your families over several years. But we all bring baggage that we're so used to carrying that baggage, we forget that we're carrying it. And it's only when somebody else comes along with a different set of baggage and you try and swap it or try and carry it together that you work out, I have brought all of this with me, all of this baggage. And some of the baggage that we bring with us pertains to money. Now, you may know this, but money and money-related problems are the #1 reason for marital breakdown in this country. So in 2018, the law firm Slater & Gordon found that over 1/3 of married couples splitting up cited financial difficulties as the basis for their breakdown. And 20% of all couples said most of their arguments are about money. And 20% blame their spouse for not being able to either spend well or save well. Right? So this is a real live issue. Of all the baggage that you bring to marriage, what you think about money, how you use money, how you save money, how you don't use money. This is a huge big issue, and practically this is the one that is most likely to cause you a problem through your married life together. And so, on the basis that understanding the baggage that you have, and understanding the kind of expectations and the unspoken assumptions that you have about money, is the best way of forestalling any difficulties in this area, I have got for you a quiz. In a moment we'll return to that quiz. But for now I just want to read you this from a really good book called The Marriage Book. It's by Nikki and Scylla Lee. They used to be on the team of the church at Holy Trinity in Brompton, and they counsel couples getting married and couples who have been married for many years. And this is what they say about their own experience with money. Nikki, who is the husband, says, Scylla and I embarked upon marriage with very different attitudes towards money. This reflected our personalities, although our parents probably helped shape our views. When we were first married, I was employed while Scylla was still a student, and each month I would give Scylla a proportion of money I earned for the household expenses. It was a long time ago, this is how things usually work. I hoped she would avoid going overdrawn, and I hoped in vain. We both thought that I was better than Scylla with money because I did not spend it as easily as she did. And it suddenly came home to me after 15 years of married life, so neither Dan or I are there, that I was quite wrong. I realised that we are better at different things. Sarah is better at spending. She's good at working out what's needed each week, as well as buying occasional treats and surprises for the family and presents for others. I, on the other hand, am much better at saving. I don't mind working out what we have or haven't got. And ever since we realised that our different tendencies are complementary, we have stopped being resentful, and money has ceased to be the source of tension. So I read you that little extract just as a way of showing that if you can begin to understand your own baggage surrounding money, your own processes surrounding money, and then begin to understand your fiancés and talk about them, you can probably make those sets of baggage work together better. But in order to do that, you have to first begin to understand. Now, what we think about money is often inherited, just like all our other baggage, and so I'm going to ask you to take a moment to answer this question. What is your very first memory of money? Be that a good memory or a bad memory? I was asked this a couple of years ago in a session, and I realised that my first memory of money was as a 5-year-old, my great uncle handing me a £5 note. He used to do it every time we saw him. He lived up in Sheffield, we lived down in Hampshire. wasn't very open. But every time we saw him, he would hand me and my sister a £5 note, and he would say to us, for goodness sake, don't save it, spend it. And ever since then, I have had a relatively easy relationship with money. I don't worry about saving it, I don't worry about spending it, because money has, ever since that was my first memory, and that coloured my memory, that coloured my feelings about money in a positive way. It was never, we need to grasp at this. Money was something that could make things better. What's your first memory of money? Be it good or bad, have a moment to see whether you can remember.
That's so you know. I was thinking that Christmas birthday to get card and the postal order. It's the post office that has the postal order to get a pound. And it would have been a pound note. Back in the 70s.
So I'm guessing there are loads of different kinds of first memories of money in the room here, and I wonder, do you have the same kinds of memories as couples? And does that first memory of money, has that coloured for you how you feel about money since? It's just useful to have these kinds of conversations because they give you little snapshots of what your feelings are and what the kind of the hidden baggage that you carry about money might be. Well, you've all had a chance to look at the quiz page. This is now your time, if you haven't already, to fill it out. Because just in the same way that we all have love languages, for want of a better word, we all have a kind of money language as well. And this quiz I have found a really good one for working out what your money language is. So please do take a few moments just to fill that out. And then when you've done that, I will give you the how to work out the answers sheet.
I couldn't find any. That's the downside. There's probably a pot somewhere. I haven't seen it. That's right. I couldn't see.
Well, you're like a good quiz, definitely. So for those of you who have already got the end of your quiz, I put on all of your tables the little box chart. So what you do when you've answered it, if you go to question 1, I love budgeting. Some people do apparently. I'm not one of those people. But question 1, if like me, you mostly disagree, and therefore the score is 0 for question 1, on your answers chart, you go across to the box that there is and enter 0 in that box. So I put my 0 in this white box here. Do you see what I mean? It makes more sense when you do it than when I describe it, doesn't it? So for instance,
Oh, okay.
boy at home. No,
It's like it was oh, cheers. Good. Who does that? Oh, I see. What I do is we just sort of sleep. Honestly, at least you
it's a fun quiz.
It's good. I don't want to know. You did that one. It'd be great when joining wonderful together, isn't it? That's quite funny. Good night. I've got the other one, I haven't got the other one. Oh, what are these? The answers?
Well, you just have the answers on, you just have to fill them in the group.
Oh, I see.
It's quite a penetrating quiz, this, I think. It asks some quite some questions that you have to reflect on a bit. I find this quite a good quiz, actually. So how are we doing? Are we all mostly there on on answering the quiz, and then it's just a case of transferring them to the boxes on the grid. And then you'll see at the bottom, we didn't tell you there was going to be arithmetic. At the bottom of the quiz grid, you'll see there's a total for each column. So if you add up the total, add up the numbers in each column on your grid, and it will tell you to what extent you are like each of these money types. So what you'll see when you fill out your grid is that each of the columns belongs to a name of a man from the Old Testament. I'm not sure why the writer of this book, Tommy Brown, decided to go with people from the Old Testament to label those, but he did. When you totted up all your scores at the bottom of the grid, work out which are the names you most correspond to, and then on the colour sheet you'll see descriptions of you according to which type you correspond to most. Well, then you're just a very balanced person.
Excellent. He's one and I'm balanced. How does that work?
It's really interesting actually, because every time I've done this quiz, about half of the room has been very balanced, and the other half of us are like, I am definitely this character. And I've never quite managed to pin down what it is that makes someone very strongly one figure or not. So Ellen's really balanced. Does anybody have a really strong I am one type? Moses. Yeah, you're Moses. So Moses endurance. Okay, Moses types are very organized with money.
Yeah.
They budget carefully and value short and long-term financial plans.
That's very good.
Yeah. The shadow side, okay, so this is really good. If you have a look on here, it tells you kind of what might be the annoying things about having that characteristic. The shadow side makes Moses types impatient when financial matters don't go according to plan. Is that something that you?
Is that you?
Yeah, it's worth having that in mind. So you're definitely a Moses. Darren, you're also a Moses. You're an Abraham. Abraham. Use money for hospitality. Abraham types use money in hospitable ways to demonstrate God's loving kindness to others. But then money's meant to make others feel valuable and special. The flip side of that, of course, is it makes it difficult for you to spend money on yourself or on your own needs. Yeah. When I did this, I came out.
Buy a guitar, I'll note that.
Did anybody else come out really strongly as one type? When I did this, I came out strongly as a Jacob. Jacob types desire beauty and view money as a means to acquire or create it. When they encounter something their hearts desire, they will go for it. Their shadow side makes them self-indulgent and wasteful. And I thought to myself, does that describe me? And at the time, I was trying to work out whether to buy a garden furniture set that was made out of galvanized steel. And I thought, yes, that does exactly describe me. Spoiler alert, I did not buy the table, but I still wish I had. Or rather, I wish I had the money for it. For those of you who are a bit more balanced, it's worth just having a look at all of those types there and seeing which ones sound most like you, because sometimes the type that you more fit into, or the types that you more fit into, don't come out in the question. What it's really useful to do is to flag out to you if you are very strongly of one type when it comes to money. You need to know that. And you also need to let your spouse know because that shapes everything that you will automatically assume about money and how it should be spent and how it should be saved. It's really useful to be aware that not all people are the same when it comes to money. Not all people have the same set of experiences with it. Not all people have the same feeling about it, and not all people use it for the same purpose. And that's fine. Money is a tool that you can use for all kinds of different things in different ways. But if you have this awareness that there are different languages of using and spending money, and of prioritizing money in the same way that there are different love languages, it helps you to frame a conversation that you might have throughout your married life, and it helps you hopefully to get out